to play for the service in the chapel. Every day, Ludwig spent most of his time at the organ, going over and over the music until he could play it all without looking once at the notes. The special morning arrived, and long before it was light, Ludwig started out through the frosty streets to the church. His fingers were numb with the cold, and he blew on them and rubbed them hard to make them warm. As the people came into the chapel, he put his hands on the keys and began to play. The music swelled through the small church, and everyone looked up in astonishment to see a young boy sitting in the choir loft, playing the organ as they had never heard it played before. Ludwig was never so happy, and from then on he helped Brother Willibald more and more, until he was playing every morning for the 6 o'clock service. At the Church of the Minorites, which was not very far away, there was an even larger organ, and after making friends with the organist there, Ludwig helped him too, playing for the special services each week in return for the lessons that he gave him on the instrument. On to the Münsterkirche went the eager young musician to make a bargain with organist Zenzer, who was the finest master of all. Soon he was studying hard with his new teacher, who was delighted with the rapid progress of his 11-year-old pupil, often inviting him to play for his older students. One morning, after a lesson on the instrument, Ludwig quietly handed his teacher a roll of music that he had just finished. "So, my young pupil, then you are a composer as well as an organist," smiled the master, looking at the closely written sheets. "But, Ludwig, this is very difficult music, much too difficult for your small hands to play." Here's the picture of him going to the church. "Oh, but that does not matter, Herr Zenzer," answered the young musician quickly. "I will play it when I am bigger." Ludwig loved the lessons at the organ and spent long hours in the church practicing by himself. What fun it was to make up melodies as he went along, and then to see in how many ways he could make them sound. Many times he hurried home to write the new music, and sometimes when she was not too busy, Mother Beethoven sat to listen to the new compositions that her son played for her on the old piano. Here he is playing the organ at the church. "It is beautiful, Ludwig. Your father, too, will be well pleased with what you have done." The best time of all the year was Mother Beethoven's birthday, where there was a fine celebration to honor her. As soon as darkness fell and her chores were all finished for the day, she was hurried off to bed. "Quickly, Karl and Johann, bring flowers and leaves," called Ludwig to his younger brothers. "We must work fast while Mother is asleep." Together, they twined laurel and blossoms around the high-backed chair until it was a lovely bower for their queen. Father Beethoven put the room in order, and when the table was piled high with good things and the stands were all in place, the neighbors crept in quietly with their instruments. At last, all was ready, and Ludwig rapped softly on his mother's door. "Joyous birthday! Joyous birthday!" shouted the company, and as soon as the stirring march began, Ludwig led Mother Beethoven in her best Sunday costume to her place on the throne, where she listened delightedly to the fine birthday concert. Soon the little house was filled with merrymakers from far and near, and when the orchestra struck up its jolly tunes, the dancing began. Ludwig played his violin with all his might as he watched his pretty mother. How good it was to see her smiling and happy. Round and round went the merry company in their stockinged feet until far into the night. Ludwig was sorry when the first pale light of early morning crept in, for now it would be a whole year before there would be another birthday celebration. Here's the party. Now that Herr Ries had been teaching him the violin, Ludwig was joyous when he could play the more difficult parts of the music in the evening concerts. He learned rapidly indeed, and it was not long before he walked proudly to the palace with Father Beethoven, his violin under his arm. Now he was ready to take his place with the men in the orchestra, playing concerts for the elector and his royal guests. Sometimes the elector played on his viola for the people, for he was very fond of the music, and he wanted everyone in Bonn to like it too. He sent for the fine musician Herr Neef to be the court organist, and Ludwig begged to go to the chapel to hear him whenever he played. If only he could study with the master someday, how much he would learn. Whenever there was a minute to spare, Ludwig was busy composing pieces, sometimes for the piano and sometimes for the instruments of the orchestra, and Herr Ries was delighted whenever his pupil brought the new music to play for him. Ludwig, why not show your compositions to Herr Neef? He is a composer himself, and perhaps he would help you with your writing. For days, Ludwig thought about the master, and at last he decided to go to see him. Making his way to the chapel, he crept quietly to a corner of the room where the brilliant musician was seated at the organ, his fingers flying over the keys. When the playing was finished, Ludwig quickly arose. He must go away at once, for surely this great master would not care to see his simple music. The door creaked, and Herr Neef turned suddenly. "Young man, did you wish to see me?" It was no use. He could not leave now, and slowly Ludwig made his way to the organ. I am Ludwig Beethoven, sir, and I have brought some music that Herr Ries thought you might like to see." Herr Neef looked closely at the short, dark-haired boy. "Writing melodies is all very well, young man, but first, let me see what you can do in music." The master gave him one difficult task after another, playing on the piano and the organ, and then on the violin and the viola. Herr Neef sat close by, nodding his head and beating time on the arm of his chair until Ludwig had finished. "So, you want to spend your life with music, young man?" Looking seriously into the kind face above him, Ludwig answered quietly, "I must become a musician, sir, for there is nothing else for me to do." Herr Neef smiled. Yes, but there is so much for you to learn, my boy, and if you are willing to work hard, come to me tomorrow and I will give you something to do." Ludwig's eyes shone. "Oh, thank you, Master Neef, thank you, sir," he cried breathlessly, and rushing home, he told the good Mother Beethoven of the good fortune that had come to him. In the long winter months, Ludwig worked harder with his new master than he had ever worked before. There were difficult works of Bach to be mastered and lessons in composition when he learned to write his melodies. "Here, my young pupil, is a little march tune. Write the melody in 9 different ways, and when you have finished the variations, bring them to me." This was a task indeed. Hurrying home, Ludwig began to work at once. On and on he wrote, and when at last the music was finished, he brought the piece proudly to Herr Neef. But the master shook his head. "No, Ludwig, it will not do. You have not followed the rules." "But see, Herr Neef, I will play it for you as I like it to sound," cried Ludwig, eagerly going to the piano. "Later, my young pupil," said the master severely. "But now, the rules come first. Go home, young man, and write the music over again." Sadly, Ludwig began the long task, and when the writing was finished, Herr Neef was pleased. "It is done, and it is well done. Now we will send the music away to be printed." To have copies made so that everyone might play his music, Ludwig could hardly wait to see his first composition. At last it came, and proudly he read the words on the cover before him. 9 Variations on a March by Ludwig van Beethoven. Here he is, practicing with his teacher at the piano. Here is his music in print. Herr Neef was so glad to see his pupil happy, and nodding his fine old head, he said to himself, Yes, and if this boy continues as he has begun, he will be another Mozart someday. From then on, Herr Neef helped his 13-year-old pupil in every way that he could, teaching him well until he played with such power and skill that he was even a better pianist and organist than he himself. And now Ludwig was happy indeed, for at last he was able to help the master who had been so kind to him, taking his place at the organ to play for the simple services whenever Herr Neef was away from Bonn. But even more than playing on the organ, Ludwig liked to compose pieces. Already in his book were compositions for the piano, some quartets for stringed instruments, and a long fugue for the organ. He especially liked this little sonatina that perhaps you can play too. I will put the name of this in the comments so you can look it up and listen to it if you like. It sounds like this. And then there's more. So Sonatina.